Jekka. Welcome to the Museum Lecture Series. My name is Beck Carland and I'm the Senior Curator of the History of Collections, and tonight I'll be your host. Before I start, I'd like to acknowledge that I live and work on, and our museums stand on, the unceded lands of the Bunurong and the Woiwurrung language groups of the Eastern Kulin Nation, and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. And also a really warm Wominjeka to any elders who are joining us tonight. I can't see who's with us. I can see the numbers are building and people are joining us by the minute. But yeah, a warm shout out to particularly any Yulenge members joining us. Today marks day 18 of 0 new cases and 0 deaths in Victoria, something we have all worked so hard to achieve. And this week, our museums reopened, which we're so excited about. Immigration Museum, Science Works, and my museum home, Melbourne Museum. And as we navigate this new normal and as we try to remain COVID safe, we're really grateful to be able to join you, continue to reach out to you, I suppose, in this way online. Tonight is the final lecture in the series. In fact, this is the final lecture for the year for the museum lecture team. For those of you who haven't joined us previously for Collecting the Curve, this has been a 3-part lecture series bringing you just a few of the team who have been documenting the Victorian experience of the pandemic. We've seen objects that tell the story of medical breakthroughs, frontline workers, ring fencing, curfew, the forced tower closures, and even the complexity of collecting memes and TikToks for the history collection. Tonight's theme is adapting the curve. And for my colleagues, 4 of my colleagues will share with you some of the objects and voices that will tell the story of the pandemic for future generations, including the very first storyline we covered, way back when the toilet paper ran out, through to the many closures and the creative ways industries have pivoted and adapted, in particular, the Melbourne music scene. We are also really excited and honoured to be collaborating tonight with Isolade Music Festival to bring you the extraordinary Moju, who is going to sing her powerful song, Native Tongue. This is interactive. There's a Q&A button at the bottom and you are welcome to post questions to ask our speakers, and I'll facilitate a Q&A at the end. That will just be with our speakers though. Moju's going to leave us after she sings. But first up, we are joined tonight by Michelle Stevenson, Head of Society and Technology, who has been leading the cross-disciplinary project that is Collecting the Curve. Michelle's going to give us a little insight into the project, how it was developed, and its aims. And I'll invite Michelle to join us now.
Thanks, Beck. Let me just take off my mask and share my screen. Whoops. There we go. I'd also like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands on which our museums are situated, the Woiwurrung and Bunurong peoples of the Eastern Kulin Nations, and pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging. COVID-19 has impacted, disrupted and changed so many aspects of our lives in a way not seen in Victoria since World War II. And even as we begin to come into a COVID normal, we're still seeing those changes. Now, as then, we have stories of businesses and industries needing to adapt to a constantly changing environment, and in some cases, simply being unable to. Here we see some of the earliest images of empty supermarket shelves due to the panic buying which swept the country and the state in February, March, April and May, and underneath, enforced food rationing during World War II and its immediate aftermath. Cast your mind back to the start of the year. What was your first experience of the pandemic? Cancelled events? What's defined the past 9 months for you? Being unable to travel, do things that you'd planned? And what objects and stories would you choose to document the pandemic for future generations? Perhaps it's the ubiquitous experience of working and learning from home. Over the past 6 months, past 9 months now, I've helped bring together and lead a team of over 20 curators, collection managers, photographers, conservators, digital creators, and front of house staff from across the museum to develop Collecting the Curve, a project that is capturing and preserving your experiences of the pandemic in Victoria's state collection. Tonight, I'll give you a brief introduction to the project before our panelists dive into some of their work in more detail. As the pandemic began to unfold in March, two of our curators, Michael and Joe, began some early collecting. Yes, one of those themes was around panic buying. However, as the scale of the pandemic and its impacts became apparent, we quickly realised that the work of two curators would not be enough to create a legacy of this defining moment in our history for current and future generations. We began by developing a framework and agreed collecting approach, covering types of material, a number of stories we wanted to collect for our different themes, ethics, and approvals. Our framework has 13 sub-collections sitting under 4 high-level themes, and we added a 5th theme to turn the camera and the microphones on ourselves and document our own experience of capturing a pandemic. From collecting stories in isolation to quarantining objects as they came into the building. To develop the framework, we used our existing areas of expertise at the museum alongside emerging trends in Victoria's response to the pandemic. And we've been able to continue to use this framework as we've moved from the early stages into lockdowns and now even into a COVID normal as we look at, the search for a vaccine under medical research, or how we're, adapting to opening up under closures and unemployment. As we were working from home, we also had to shift all of our normal processes from physical and face-to-face to digital. So there was not just the challenge of how do we capture this event quickly and rapidly, but how do we do it in a new working environment for ourselves. The frameworks allowed us to develop a collection that has both breadth and depth. Our targeted approach, rather than conducting a large-scale public call-out via social media, as many other organisations has done, has assisted us in documenting Victorian experiences of the pandemic as they happen and rapidly adding them to the collection so that people see their current lived experiences reflected in their state museum. This t-shirt came from JB Hi-Fi when they were able to open to the public in that small period between the lockdowns. This rapid response approach enables us to capture and document in depth much of the ephemeral material and experiences of the pandemic, which can be quite difficult to capture if you wait until a later date. One of the key approaches for us has been to send our museum photographers into their local neighbourhoods to capture how people and businesses are adapting or not adapting to the restrictions imposed by the pandemic. And we've actually just repeated this exercise to capture reopening and moving to a COVID normal. Not all of the stories that we've collected have been rapid. Some take time to develop, to build relationships, to work out what to capture, to work through the ethical issues that come with contemporary collecting, and to see how an event unfolds. And here you have Beck, explaining consent to some nurses in hotel quarantine. Having so many staff working on the project has meant that we've been able to dip in and dip out and focus in on particular themes and events as they come to prominence. So it's been really valuable in doing that quick, rapid work and then enabling us to, work on what are the longer term projects. Because the framework's made it so clear in terms of what we're looking to collect, both for staff and the general public, it's enabled people to suggest stories and objects that might be of interest to us. We've been able to work to develop relationships as we need to. And the team, of course, are also always looking for opportunities, whether it's finding things on social media, reaching out to their networks, or in this case, identifying particular people or organisations to follow up about key stories. So this is Victoria's only mask. This is a company that worked with Victoria's only mask manufacturer at the time to reverse engineer one of their mask making machines so that we could increase mask manufacturing capacity in Victoria. And that was something that we went out to actively collect. As our mandate is not just to document history, but also to make it accessible, our project's expanded to include a number of public outputs, sharing objects and stories as they're required. These include digital products, of course, being in a pandemic, a linked education program, and displays at our 3 museums, which now that we're open, please do go and visit them. And of course, this lecture series. As we're coming to a COVID normal, I'm often asked about the project's duration. We recently completed a project review and identified earlier stories to revisit and looking at kind of how some of those early things have changed or not and how people are continuing to adapt. And we've also identified any gaps and things where we think we need to go back and strengthen particular areas. And we're doing that by pulling together discrete teams to really target those and just get some kind of short-term maximum impact. Now, I'd like to hand back to Beck. So Fiona, Michael, and Marita can share some of their work with you. Thanks, Beck.
Thanks, Michelle. Gosh, we really have done a lot this year, haven't we? Looking back on it, it's extraordinary. Our next speaker is Fiona Kinsey. Fiona is our Senior Curator of Images and Image Making. And tonight, Fiona is going to take us back to the very first storylines we covered, panic buying in the supermarket and the changing relationships between producers, suppliers, and consumers. Oh, we've lost Fiona temporarily. There she is. Over to you, Fiona.
Thanks, Beck. And hello, everyone in the audience. I'm talking to you from my home office in Melbourne, and I also would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of this land that I'm speaking to you from, the Woiwurrung and the Boomerang people of the Eastern Kulin Nations, and I pay my respect to elders past, present, and future. I'm going to bring up my presentation for you now. Did you ever imagine that people all around the world would embark on a buying frenzy in 2020, leaving nothing on supermarket shelves and forcing retailers to ration essential products, in particular toilet paper, for months on end? Well, me neither. But I'm sure I don't need to tell you that that is exactly what has happened this year during the COVID-19 pandemic. You and I have all lived this experience, although we have all lived it in unique and different ways. On screen, you are seeing some images of the impacts of panic buying in Melbourne in early March. Empty shelves as far as you can see, which will no doubt be very familiar scenes to you. Toilet paper, hand sanitizer, and food first started disappearing off shelves in late February, while shortages in an array of other products quickly followed. Eventually, sweeping product restrictions, along with other equity initiatives, were brought in to manage the situation and provide a fairer retail experience for everyone. But supermarket shortages persisted for several months, causing real hardship for many people. Panic buying came to a pause in the middle of the year for a while as infection rates slowed and people adjusted to life under COVID. But shopping frenzies have continued to flare up, again here and there, as infection rates have jumped and new lockdowns have been announced, including at the start of Victoria's second wave lockdown in late June. And just this week, we've seen toilet paper stripped from the shelves again, this time in South Australia, as they've got a new COVID-19 cluster breaking out and new restrictions. So I think panic buying is going to be one of the storylines that remains relevant for the whole year. And this is the challenge of contemporary collecting. We just don't know what's going to happen next. So how has the museum documented and collected the experience of panic buying in Victoria? Well, my fellow panellist, Michael Reason, actually initiated collecting on this topic before handing it over to me and another colleague, Nick Crotty. Michael kicked things off as panic buying began in early March with the acquisition of the supermarket ephemera you are just seeing, and also these bold decorative badges. These badges highlight the light-hearted, creative responses that some Australians had to the shortages on their shelves, and they comment on the mood of the country at the time. Nick and I started working on panic buying in about April, but decided to also broaden our focus to include the general retail experience during COVID. We were interested in the ways that business quickly adapted to provide alternative supply chains and how consumers became creative to source hard-to-find items. We also wanted to document the ways that shopping was made safer. Between Michael, Nick and I, we have so far acquired around 170 items across the different storylines that I just mentioned. The items date between February and June and include almost 25 objects, 10 documents, and about 135 images. Most of our registered objects are now on our collections online website, which also has a number of thematic narratives linked to our collection items. So you could take a look at those for some more information and images beyond what I can share with you tonight. Photographs, and specifically digital photography, have formed the core of our COVID-19 panic buying and shopping collection, and I want to dive into some of these images with you now. The first thing to note is that the majority of the photographs that Nick and I have acquired were taken by our in-house museum photographers, as Michelle mentioned, and I'd like to acknowledge the photography team as our creative partners in building the pandemic archive. Their visual documentation has been a critical component of the Collecting the Curve project, and a big shout out to our image management and copyright team as well. There's a lot of behind the scenes work that goes on to make sure our images are accessible and that we have permissions to share them. Rodney Start, John Augier and Trevor Mason all contributed a large number of images on the themes of panic buying and the retail experience, photographing small businesses as well as the large multinationals. They were out on the streets of Melbourne and in regional Victoria in May, while we were often home in lockdown, working from home still. And this was before the second lockdown, actually. They've been true collaborators in this project, bringing a sharp eye and their own interpretation to their brief. Some of the advantages of using our own photographers is that we have a team who can, within the limits of their availability, of course, be rapidly dispatched to cover our priority curatorial areas and can create an extensive archive quickly and efficiently, which is important in a rapid response situation like the pandemic. They provide professional quality images that are created as high resolution files and stored in a preservation standard format. The high resolution means that a lot of visual detail is captured and the images can be enlarged for research or exhibition use more easily. Another important source of visual material and information for the panic buying and retail stories has been you, the public. A number of people contacted the museum after hearing about our project and have donated photographs to the collection. I believe that some of our contributors are tuning in tonight, and I wanted to say welcome and thank you for your contribution to our project. While community images are often low resolution because they're frequently taken on mobile phones, their impact and immediacy, I think, makes up for this, as you can see with this image. They also come with a personal story from the community. Natalia Rios was a member of the public who got in touch with us in May after taking this fantastic and very compelling image that you have been looking at. Natalia took this shot on the 4th of March at a Melbourne supermarket. This was the day that some supermarkets introduced a 4-pack limit on toilet paper, although clearly that limit had failed to curb the panic buying. These limits were further reduced a week later and remained until May. So Natalia's photo is witness to this early moment of panic buying in Melbourne. These next photos were taken by Frances Gleeson. Her photos are another powerful record of the extraordinary shopping behaviour that COVID triggered. Frances and her sister Angela were shopping in Melbourne on March 15th when Frances took these photographs. Angela told me, and I'm quoting her now, "I was immediately surprised as I drove into the car park. It was extremely busy, cars everywhere. It was very unusual for a Sunday afternoon shop. We entered the store and there was a shopping frenzy going on. We looked at each other and said, what is going on?" In May, after realising we were lacking photographs of regional Victoria taken by the community, I reached out to my networks in country towns, and Nicola Dunnicliffe-Wells sent me through some photographs of shops in Bendigo that had adapted to the shortage of essential goods. And this particular image shows the commercial 5-kilogram size pasta bags available to customers who couldn't source pasta anywhere else. You can also see their delightful social distancing markers on the floor. These community images have been important in capturing moments in the pandemic before our own photography team began their documentation work, and I'm appreciative to all the contributors. The collection that we have acquired has created a good foundation for the stories of panic buying and shopping during the pandemic, but we still have more work to do. We need to flesh out the nuances and detail and resolve the absent voices. The focus of the panic buying collection work so far has largely been visual documentation. And while this record of retail environments and changes around consumer behaviour is a great resource, we need more context. Having more personal stories which give humanity and meaning to the images of empty shelves and social distancing signage is critical. We have some personal reflections from the people who donated our community images, like Natalia, Frances and Nicola, which are very insightful. And my colleague Nick recorded an interview with a supermarket manager, which is an important story too. However, I'd like to tap into more voices from the community, the essential workers who kept supermarkets ticking over, and a wider range of shoppers, including the panic buyers themselves, but also more people who bore the brunt of the stock shortages, including the elderly, low income, non-English speaking and other vulnerable groups. While we have all collectively lived through this pandemic, it has not been a singular experience, and it is important that we hear from a diverse range of Victorians. It also became clear as I was writing this paper that the collection lacks images of panic buying in full flight, with supermarkets full of people and showing the pandemonium, such as what we have seen on the news and social media. Our images convey the aftermath, capturing a stillness and emptiness, what Natalia Rios described as eerie. Addressing this absence in our images is something for us to consider, but there are copyright and privacy issues to keep in mind which may prevent us doing so. So while there is still work to be done, all things considered, I think the collection that we have built, all while living that pandemic ourselves, is an important one, and I encourage you to check it out online. So thanks for listening, and I'm going to hand back to Beck now.
Thanks, Fiona. Yeah, I remember back to that feeling, that eerie feeling in the supermarket, and I have to say it felt really selfish at the time. So it's horrible to see that happening again in South Australia. Now, our next speaker, who's already on the screen, is Michael Reason. And Michael is the Curator of Leisure and Social Spaces at Museums Victoria. And it was Michael, actually, in the early days of forced closures and lockdown, who raised the possibility of us documenting this extraordinary moment. And yes, the moment went on a bit long, but tonight he's going to share with us some of the work so far. Over to you, Michael.
Hello, everyone, and Greetings from the Mornington Peninsula. I just hope the technology holds out tonight. And I too would like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land I'm speaking from, the Bunurong people, and pay my respect to elders past, present and emerging, and acknowledge also that sovereignty has never been ceded. Now, actually, I'll just share my screen. So just give me one moment here. Now, in trying to work out what to call my talk, I came across this wonderful quote when I was reading a book about Berlin, and it's from a 1980s Berlin punk band, and it was just a great quote and sort of encapsulated that feeling that we've all been experiencing while living through this period and trying to document it at the same time. It really has been such a rapid learning experience for us all, and it really has been very little time to draw a breath. So yeah, it's a very unusual experience where you're actually trying to document something you're living through. So I have to really congratulate all my colleagues and for all the amazing work they've done. And yes, they can blame me for sort of kicking the ball, but they've certainly run with it. So thank you for that. Now, I was going to be looking at sort of cancellations and pivoting. And I thought, how am I going to do that in a short amount of time? But sitting next to me, I've got a box of bits and pieces, which I've been throwing things into ever since this thing began in March. So what I thought I'd do is I'd fish some stuff out sort of over time, and we'll just have a look and say, what does it say? What sort of things have we collected and what's it say about this period? Now, so I'm going to start with the first part's called What a Week It Was, and I'm going back to that second week in March. I think we'll all remember that. Now we're starting with the long weekend. And what was long weekend? Of course, it was Moomba. And everything just seemed to be going along as normal, which was a bit strange when you try and look back at it. On the 9th, the Monday, the Moomba parade went ahead as normal. And a journalist from the Age newspaper went and interviewed people at the time. And it's interesting to see some of the quotes and to reflect on them now. And yeah, this is some of the things that people said on that day when they were reflecting on coronavirus, what it was going to mean for their lives. Little did they know that this was going to change very quickly. And by quickly, I mean by the end of that week. There was a lot of things happening that week. One of them, of course, was the Grand Prix. And this is actually probably one of the first things I collected that wasn't panic buying. And this is the poster for Friday the 13th. That's a very apt date. And it's talking about the Grand Prix. And if you remember, there was a lot of chaos on that morning. People went to the track and the race got cancelled very early that day. So it's an interesting thing now to reflect on. And as our other speakers have mentioned, this sort of ephemera is the sort of thing you want to grab as it's coming out. So I got that and also got the program as well. Other events were sort of falling like flies. Around the museum, we had the fashion festival in full swing. And unfortunately, that got cancelled, or at least the end of it, which was unfortunate because that was the graduates' parade. And then also the garden show, which was celebrating its 25th anniversary, was another event. So it was amazing looking back at all those big events that were happening in March that didn't happen. It wasn't just the big events, of course. Smaller events as well were affected. I live down here near Frankston, and I was able to collect some of the posters to do with events. To do with events that were supposed to be happening as well. And these included the street art festival, and there was a record fair, and there was also going to be a children's party at Langwarrin. So I was able to rescue these things after they were cancelled. Now I just got a bit lost there, and I missed this part, which is one of the most important things that got cancelled. It was the comedy festival, and so I ran and got the program, of course, and put a couple of copies of that away. It's a real record of what could have been and the effect it had on not just the performers, but on the audience as well. All these things that they missed out on. And you look at it and said, none of these things happened, which was just a tragic shame. I actually went and took a photograph outside the Athenaeum Theatre the week after, and it's a bit like a boulevard of broken dream when you look at all these things that didn't happen. Here's a very optimistic sign saying, fortunately we've had to close now, but we hope these things will be put on soon. And of course, it hasn't reopened yet. So yeah, that's a very tragic thing to look at. I actually found I had a copy of this, which was talking about all the cultural events that were going to happen in 2020. And of course, most of them got cancelled. So that's now a very important record of the things that didn't happen in 2020. Now, as time went on, some things were able to adapt and some quicker than others. Art exhibitions were one of the things that were able to sort of pivot and go online. So this is an invitation, which is in my box. which I got to go to Confined 11, which is an exhibition of artworks by Indigenous artists currently in or recently released from prison in Victoria. And it was going to be at the Glen Ira City Council Gallery, but unfortunately that couldn't go ahead. So the organisation, The Torch, was able to pivot very quickly and do a virtual gallery. And so here we go. This is the virtual gallery. You were able to wander around it, admire the art, and maybe, you know, I'm a bit of an internet shopper and maybe my finger slipped and I was able to purchase one of the pieces and it was sent to me and it's a wonderful experience. And, you know, that's the best sort of internet shopping you can do. Now I'm going to jump ahead until July. If you remember July, it was that between the first wave and then the second wave started to come. And one of the things that got cancelled then was our trips from metropolitan Victoria to regional Victoria. And we had to stop, you know, leaving the city boundaries. And two men who worked in advertising decided to come up with this sort of quite quirky, comical sort of campaign that was going to, you know, stop people visiting regional Victoria. And they did it in this very sort of imaginative and quirky comedy way. Here are some of them that they had. They were on the, there were posters, there were also online. And yeah, they have a great quirky sense of humour. Fortunately, most people saw the joke in them. Here, as I said, here are some of them. The mayor of the Alpine Shire, which covers Bright, wasn't quite as impressed by this and thought it wasn't quite the sort of thing he wanted people to say, but I think he managed to live with it in the end. It's funny, just recently, actually, just last week, we've now promoting that we do go to regional Victoria. In fact, they want us to go to regional Victoria with our wallets. And it's funny, the two guys contacted me again and said, you know, you're interested in our first campaign. We've actually come up with a second campaign, which is now to get people to go to regional Victoria. So here are some of those. I said, yes, we'd definitely be interested in looking at these as well. And they make a nice sort of balance between stop and then go again. So here are some of them. Now, jumping ahead, I've gone through my box again and I've jumped ahead to October. And by October, a lot of the things that would have been cancelled weren't, because they'd worked out ways to pivot and to actually adapt to the new way of existing and running events. And a number of these were the sporting events, the big sporting events that we were normally in September, but now they're in October. So there were three big ones: the VIX, the women's netball, the football, the AFL, and the rugby, and they all happened within the same week of October. And for some, you know, just as almost like a consolation prize, teams from Melbourne won all three of them. So I've been running around collecting ephemera to do with those. So first of all, we had the great victory of the Melbourne Vixens. Then we had the rugby, which the Melbourne Storms won. And then, of course, the big one, the AFL. And here are some of the earlier football records. And I actually had to find out what a football record was, because I'm not the biggest AFL fan, but I've certainly learnt a lot. And so these are some of these showing you the amazing sort of the period. And this, of course, is the grand final record. And so we're able to add that as well. One of my colleagues has a family member that attended the grand final in Brisbane. So we're going to, you know, add to the collection as well some of the things that they gathered and some of their experiences as well. So yeah, it's been quite a ride, and as I said, my box is sort of overflowing with treasures. I want to finish off with one of my favourite acquisitions, or potential acquisitions, to say, because I'm still working with the person. I read an article about this amazing character called the Melbourne Spider-Man, which I'm sure you may have seen around the traps, especially if you live in St Kilda, or you may have seen him on TV. And he was a gentleman. He sort of outed himself, Stuart Tyson. And I was reading about him and the amazing things he's been doing. And he did mention that he's going to be upgrading his suit. So I wrote to him, his email address, the Melbourne Spider-Man, and I said, if you ever decide to upgrade your suit, we'd love to look at acquiring your Spider-Man suit, which has become very iconic. And he said, well, just by chance, I've just upgraded. So he saw the importance in what he did, and what he said about kindness and trying to bring a smile to people's faces. And so I look forward to working with Stuart and bringing this wonderful piece of sweaty lycra into the collection. So as I said, I just wanted to give you a touch of what I've been doing over this time. And I hope that's given you some ideas of things that have been dropping into my box under my desk. And yeah, I look forward to sharing more of these with you online and adding to it as time goes on. So thank you very much for that.
Thanks, Michael. I'm just going to turn your camera off, Michael. There we go. Now, before we go on, I'm just going to run a really quick poll, if that's all right with you, Marita. You'll see at the bottom of the screen the polling. I'm going to turn it on right now. I'm launching it. I'm just going to leave it up for a second. I called it the super quick poll because that's literally what it is. There's just 3 questions, and I would love it if you could answer them for me. It just gives us a sense of how many people are attending tonight, how you found us, and it helps us learn lecture to lecture on how to make these better and how to find our audience. Thank you so much. I can see everyone quickly answering those. I'm just going to leave it up for a minute longer while I introduce Marita. So our next speaker is Marita Dyson. Marita is a collection manager at Museums Victoria. She's also an amazing musician and songwriter who was personally caught up in the devastating impact that the pandemic restrictions have had on live music. Tonight, she's going to share with us a homegrown creative response to that devastation, the Isolate Music Festival. She will unpick the significance of the material she's collected and how it might inform a broader understanding of the pandemic for future generations. Marita will then hand over to Moju, a feature artist from Isolate Festival, to sing her powerful song, Native Tongue. Over to you, Marita.
Thanks very much, Beck, and thank you to everyone for joining us tonight for this final lecture. I'm very happy to be here. And I would like to acknowledge that I'm on the unceded sovereign lands of the Wurundjeri Woiwurrung peoples of the Eastern Kulin Nation. I pay my respects to elders past and present and to next generations of community. I pay my respects to all First Peoples watching tonight. I acknowledge First Peoples' continuous connections to land and waters and long traditions of song, storytelling and culture on these lands for thousands of generations, which continues today. I would also like to acknowledge members of the Isolate Festival team and the Victorian music community who are watching with us tonight. Thank you for your generosity and your time in sharing your work and stories with Museums Victoria and with the people of Victoria. I'm now going to share my screen. I'm at home on Wurundjeri Woiwurrung country, and I have an image up of Point Cook, which is one of my favourite places. That's the Wurrung Woiwurrung country, and just big skies are something that I've yearned for during lockdown, and I've really enjoyed sitting in the backyard and looking up at the moon, and then texting family and saying, "Have you seen the moon? It's really beautiful tonight." That's a way of connecting. So I will now share my screen, which I've rehearsed like 50,000 times, and it's going to take me one moment, but I'll just talk through it. There it is. I had one of those moments for a few minutes where I was like, is it going to show? It has. Here it is. So it's my great pleasure to talk about the Isolate Online Music Festival today. I was really fortunate to perform in the second Isolate Music Festival. It's a festival that has brought hundreds and hundreds of musicians together, many of them Victorian, and musicians from across the country and musicians from across the world. So it's a really exciting story that I'm very grateful to be able to work on at the moment. You'll see one of the more recent poster images on the cover of this slide, which was celebrating frontline workers. So, as you've heard, back in March, on the 16th of March, a state of emergency was declared. And you've heard the stories from Fiona, you've seen the shelves, the panic buying, and perhaps you were there in the supermarket, perhaps you saw it, perhaps you waited, perhaps you saw it online. I saw this poster coming up in my Instagram feed, and I was really excited to see that there were going to be 74 musicians playing a free online concert. And I love that this poster reflects that moment in time in around the 20th of March, when we were running out of toilet paper, and there was a panic buying experience kind of sweeping the city and sweeping the state. When the state of emergency was declared, stay-at-home provisions were actioned, and restrictions on many activities and public gatherings were implemented, and these affected music and performance venues and events. These restrictions were implemented to stop the spread of COVID-19 in Australia, and that's been really successful. They also had a devastating financial and social impact on many people's activities and businesses, and on the Victorian music community. Musician, band booker, educator, festival curator Emily Ullman sprang into action, responding with creativity and resourcefulness to the impact of the pandemic restrictions on the Australian music community. Emily founded Isolate, the online music festival broadcast through social media platform Instagram, and she founded it from her Melbourne home. Isolate artists broadcast 20-minute performances live from their homes each weekend, and audiences are encouraged to comment and respond within the app, purchase festival fundraising merchandise, or donate to Support Act charity, or donate directly to the artists. And you can see here on this slide, just the day after the very first Isolate, it was across The Guardian, a headline story. And you can see here 3 artists, Julia Jacqueline, Stella Donnelly and Angie McMahon, were among the performers who performed at that first Isolate. And you can see how people could add comments in, they could talk to each other. It was a very immediate and a very interactive experience, and a very intimate experience of being able to listen to performers on your phone directly there at home. It's been a real game changer, and it's brought a lot of people together. But here's Emily. Emily's been nominated for a lot of awards, as has Isolate Festival as a whole, because it really has shifted what we know of as live music in Victoria, and probably in the world, as we're all pivoting to more kind of digital spaces. And certainly as a musician, it was the first time I had ever done an Isolate and a live Instagram performance, and it was through Isolate. And I think that Isolate has really helped a lot of musicians to make that jump and that pivot into a digital space, which can feel quite kind of scary. And like now, like being live but being alone is a really different experience. Now I'm just going to read out to you 2 quotes from Emily that she's kindly shared with us to help us document the festival and the pandemic. So this is a quote. Isolate was born out of a desperate situation. A whole industry was closed down. Musicians, of course, but also bookers, managers, booking agents, sound and lighting techs, tour managers, and on and on. Isolate was created so that musicians could showcase their work to existing fans and hopefully new ones, to encourage donations to Support Act, the only Australian charity that provides crisis relief services to artists, crew, and music workers as a result of ill health, injury, or mental health problems, and to provide people connection and company during lockdown. Isolate was originally intended to be a one-off weekend, but the response was so overwhelmingly positive from musicians, their teams, and fans that I felt compelled to keep it going and establish it as an ongoing festival. And then it took on a life of its own. It became an opportunity for musicians to retain their connection to their fans, to gain new followers, to showcase their work and advertise their merch and any new releases, and to have an excuse to rehearse and dress themselves up and their spaces. And it also became an opportunity to create community, and in doing so, to promote mental health and staying positive. Importantly, it also offered access to live music for otherwise isolated and marginalised people with physical, psychological and geographical barriers, end quote. That's a really important quote that will go into our archives. And it's really important when we're collecting contemporary events and experiences that we have first-person voices that describe the exact conditions that we are all experiencing. Now, I usually work as a collection manager, not as a curator of stories. So this has been another thing that I've learned during the lockdown, because I can't go into the museum to care for collections. So I'm working on helping to collect stories. So I suggested to our collection acquisition committee that I thought these posters were a really amazing collection that we should be looking at to acquire into the museum, because Sebastian White, who is the artist and graphic designer who designs all of Isolade's visual material, has really captured the experience of the pandemic as it's happened, and it's reflected back each week in these posters. I do not know how he's done it, because so far Isolade has been running for, this is the 34th week. So every week there's a new poster that reflects these amazing themes. So here we have, of course, pasta. We just saw those photos that Fiona shared of the large 5 kilo bags of pasta in regional Victoria. Pasta here features on week 2. And I love the weekly titles. Don't panic, we all get a second helping. So that was a fantastic Isolade. 74 artists, and I haven't included the back of this poster, but when you see it, all the bands listed and their Instagram handles and their timing. Anyone who's a graphic designer or who deals with text in slides or online formats will know it is a real challenge to include all of that information with the humour and the poignancy and great design. To have it all in one package is a really great achievement. So here, of course, we have Isolade number 3, good things come in 3. So there's always kind of often a music pun, I think, in a lot of these titles. I'll need to check that with Sebastian and Emily. And here we have, of course, how can you not have hand sanitizer? Very important. Moving on to week 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. Are you hungry for some more? Well, always. I was always hungry during lockdown and constantly cooking. And of course, tinned tomatoes were essential. And here we have so many bands listed on these posters. And again, I'll just remind you, I'm only showing you the first side. There's actually a whole back side that lists all the artists, so we're collecting that as well. And what I feel is that these posters will become a very important historical reference to provide a snapshot of all the artists who are DJs, performers, who are working at this moment in time. It really does capture what is going on during this period of time. And I think that's a really important record. Any historians out there may agree that this could potentially function like a Sans McDougall directory, where we can find out who is creating music and working in the arts and as DJs and performers at this moment in time. Take 5, here we have eggs, another staple food. Then we start moving into other things. I'm sure people haven't forgotten the sourdough baking craze and the shortages of flour that swept the early weeks of lockdown. Here it is reflected in this slide of staple goods flour for fully 6. Then we move on to feeling 9. Of course, we were encouraged to entertain and calm ourselves with jigsaws, captured here in this beautiful poster. Moving into May, there's small bottles of mini hand sanitizer. Isolate and chill, a reference to a Netflix kind of meme that has circulated. There's a card up in the top of that image referencing cashless transactions and a mask. This is the first time a mask has appeared in the Isolate sequence of posters, so that's a really important kind of moment captured there. Then we move into check 1, 2, referring to gardening. I saw lots of beautiful photos of people getting into gardening during lockdown. Of course, online shopping, it's been huge, so it's represented here. Your order has arrived, and you'll notice in the text underneath each photo there's also really good play with using numerals amongst there, so you know that that's week 13. Your order has arrived, listing all the bands. You can see now Isolate has grown and there are international acts there in the lineups as well. And this is a Melbourne-born, Victorian-based project that is just growing. People are really connecting and it's resonating with people. Flat packed and ready to go. I'm sure quite a few of you listening may have had to buy some furniture, perhaps a desk. I know I needed to move a desk into our lounge so that I could keep working. This is a beautiful parody of a well-known furniture retailer that you see there. And then all the artists are listed down the bottom. Oh, how tenacious. With gyms closed, people turn to online exercise. So you have this lovely image. And I love the bottle of wine and chocolate behind the laptop screen there. There's some beautiful kind of poignant humour in these designs. And then when we moved to July, which was when we were in the middle of stage 4 lockdowns, or no, not the middle, the beginning, there was really a strong uptake in online gaming, and that's represented here with just plug in and play. Well, not necessarily online, but computer games. We get to week 16 and we see a reference to the N95 masks here in this particular design. And then moving across to edition 19, we have references to home hair cutting, home hair dyeing, which was being taken up in higher numbers because hairdressers were closed, and we see a lot of other popular references in that image as well. And these posters are just really magnificent graphic design. There's a lot of layers of imagery and humour and information. They are filled with information, both visual and textual, and that's what makes them so important as items for the museum to collect that will be very useful into the future, but are also just great items to kind of celebrate and to look at now of their artworks. This is week 22, and this is one of my favourites because this was when the 5 kilometre restriction was brought in regarding movement. And so it reflects that, and it's a really clever use of the kind of map image that comes up either on smartphones or online. And you can see the artists are all listed as street names. So it's a really clever design. It reflects that immediate shift in what restrictions we were living through, and it also contains all that really valuable information about artists performing at this moment in time. So we're not only collecting the wonderful poster series that represents the Isolade Music Festival, we're also collecting images that artists have kindly donated to us of their live performances. So here we have a fantastic set of images that have been donated from musician Chicha Ridwan from her live performance at Melbourne Isolade Edition 1. So this is really wonderful. We have photos from the very first Isolade, and you can see like it's such an amazing opportunity that audiences have to see artists performing in their own homes. It's quite it's really intimate, and it's something that has really just taken over the last few months of performances kind of coming out of people's homes, and it's a real shift that is happening right now that I think is really important for us to document. We also have 3 images that musician and artist Steph Hughes has kindly donated from her Isolade performance, which was in April 2020. And Steph has also provided a really lovely quote that I'm going to read out to you about her experience performing at Isolade. This was such a fun night, trying to work out how to play a gig at home. My partner Mia did very well, juggling a failing phone battery, bribery lolly snakes, and our sugar high 3-year-old. It was a really fun, silly night, and it's a really fond memory. And I remember these performances and how I was just so engaged and there, experiencing that immediacy. And it's really important to also document how performers are also working from home. And that's a huge shift from working in venues where it's quite a different setup. You have to manage lots of different technologies and aspects. So it's really important that we document how people are working from home across all professions and sectors and different experiences. That's the end of my presentation, and I forgot to add that we're also collecting some t-shirts because they are tangible physical items that also reflect the festival. So it's been a great pleasure to work on this. I'm going to stop sharing my screen just a moment. Now I think I'm back. Now we are very fortunate to host a live streamed performance tonight, just like Isolade. It's my great honour to hand over to brilliant, award-winning artist Moju to perform her song, Native Tongue. Thank you so much, Moju.
I don't speak my father's native tongue. I was born under the southern sun. I don't know where I belong. I don't know where I belong. My great-granddaddy was Wiradjuri. My father came here from the Philippines. It's where I live, it's where I wanna be. Ooh, but you make me feel so ill at ease. I don't speak my father's native tongue. I was born under a southern sun. I don't know where I belong. I don't know where I belong. It's easy enough for you to say this ain't no thing, but I'm the one, you ain't the one. Been living in this skin. If you wanna call me something, call it to my face. But I will not apologize for taking up this space. Every time you cut me down, I'm gonna come back fierce. The time is through for being nice. Let's call it what it is. I don't speak my father's native tongue. I was born under the southern sun. I don't know where I belong. I don't know where I belong. I don't speak my father's native tongue. I was born under a southern sun. I don't know where I belong. I don't know where I belong. Thank you very much.
Wow, thank you so much, Moju. That was amazing. We are so lucky. We're blessed to be doing this work and to be working with amazing people, to be documenting the experience of our own city and our state. And I would implore you, if you love the Melbourne music scene as much as we all do support Isolade. The money goes to help music workers, and yeah, I would implore you to do that. So that's the end of the talks tonight, but we're going to have a little Q&A, and I'll invite all the speakers to turn their cameras on if they'd like to join me. We have a few questions. Hi, welcome back everyone. We're missing Michael. That might have been because I turned him off before. I'm just going to...
yeah, that was. It's telling me you turned me off.
Okay, I'll turn you back on.
Oh, thank you.
Let's see here. Bear with me for just one moment. There you go, Michael. You should be able to turn your camera on now.
Yeah.
Great.
Thank you.
So we had a few comments actually, and one I think relates directly to Fiona and the early work Michael did with the supermarket. Amanda's saying that her nephew, who is 18 and was a checkout person at Woolies in Malvern, experienced that the manager took all the young people off the checkouts because of abuse by customers. I think we all heard about this a lot, and I'm just wondering, maybe Fee, if there's, if you've thought about how we might capture the kind of, like I said, it felt really selfish at the time, but it was also a bit dangerous. You mentioned capturing some more around that theme.
Yeah, it's a great question. I would like to try and follow through some stories with the workers who were essential workers who really were there while many of us stayed at home, and for good reason, and we really appreciate that. And we all read stories in the papers about just what was described about people being abused in the supermarket. So just because of the year that has been, we haven't really tracked down those people for those interviews. Perhaps the person who's just asked that question could contact us through our Ask Us service on our website, and we might be able to follow up with you. But I would love to just get a broad range of stories from people working in supermarkets, people at the front of the supermarket, people doing the shelf stocking, people cleaning. I think there's a whole kind of army of people out there that, we all appreciate, and we just don't know enough about them. So it would be great to preserve those stories. So that's kind of on the next step, I think.
Yeah.
Not quite yet.
Michael, for you, I've got a question about forced closures. And now that we are opening back up, there's a question wondering if you're documenting the kind of the new ways we're working, or businesses are, or festivals, the kinds of things that you were documenting closing, if you're documenting the way they are opening back up.
Oh yeah, definitely. That's something I've been looking into and contacting various people. I mean, it's always the challenge of finding sort of material culture to document that, but we'll definitely be sort of, again, it's like Fiona, we want to tell the whole story from beginning to the new normal. So I'd definitely be interested in speaking to people and finding out the different experiences for the large and the small and the metropolitan and the regional, of course.
Marita, there was a question asking if you were considering interviewing any of the musicians.
Yes, that is the next step. The next step is we need to record interviews with people, or oral histories as they're called in kind of historical and museum settings, to document, we want to have people's voices, because as you can imagine, it's really important to be able to hear people's voices. There's a whole lot of meaning that is in sound that is really important to capture. And this is also about sound. We also would love some footage of people performing, and also recognising that it would be great to have some footage of people performing with interactions from audience. But again, that's a real challenge, because social media is a space where, like in terms of getting permissions from everyone who comments, that's something that would need to be looked at. So it's quite complex, and it can take us quite a long time to work through all of those requirements. But we are really excited for that. And actually, I would just like to add one comment, that it's important to recognise that a lot of people will not have been able to produce creative work during the pandemic, because they will not have been able to access their studios. They may not have the resources that they need. They may not have materials. They also might be, like many artists, are still processing the experience of the pandemic in terms of generating new work and responses. So we need to acknowledge that this is an experience that people will reflect on and they will continue to make work about into the future. So it's not just about now and that's it, it's over. It's something that we are living through, and we will continue to kind of look at what kind of responses come from the artistic community in relation to this.
I personally attended a lot of Isolate, and something that I'd noticed that you could also incorporate in is it was a beautiful way to kind of feel all the feels that you have when you go to a gig, because you bump into someone at the bar and you have a quick drink, you can't really talk for very long, and it was kind of like that on Instagram, because you would notice someone pop up in the comments or posting pictures, and it was like, oh, look, Tom's here, or look, Marita's here. And it felt really nice. And then I remember texting people, and it felt really social. I know it was established to support the music industry, but it supported everybody, because also the punters, we got to enjoy the music that we love. I've got another question here from Tony Day asking, has there been collecting of children's artworks as experience of lockdown? I can answer that, maybe then hand over to someone else. I've personally collected drawings of Wolfie Hammond, a young boy who was in hotel quarantine with his family, and they're beautiful drawings. And he actually used them as a way to communicate with other guests at the hotel through his window. So that's something that I've collected. Anybody else? Michelle?
So that not things that I've collected personally, but we've had, 20 staff working on this project. So in our last lecture, one of our colleagues, Moya McFadgen, spoke about some beautiful chalk drawings that were done on the footpath by two young girls from the Lee family that they did to kind of brighten up their neighbours' day during lockdown as people walked past. So we've worked with that family to take photographs and capture some of their works and the tools that they use to create those. We've got a beautiful story of a gratitude journal written by a young boy that we're in the process of acquiring now. I think it's gone through the first of our acquisition stage and soon to be signed off. So we have collected creative works from, professionals, children, adults. We've got an amazing quilt done by someone in lockdown. So the whole gamut of creative responses to this pandemic.
Well, look, we've run out of questions and we are just over time also. So I want to thank all of the speakers here tonight. Everyone that's left, please join me in thanking them for their work throughout the year and their thoughtfulness in joining us tonight. And all the speakers throughout the year. This has also been a gift for us to be able to connect with you, our wonderful community, whilst in lockdown. All of the lectures from this year, from this particular series, but also the earlier series in the year, are all now on the museum website. So if you miss any, please go and check them out at your leisure. And I do hope that you will join us when we return in March next year with a new series. Fire Past, Present and Future will be a cross-disciplinary series that reveals the significant work within collection development, fieldwork, research and publications across the museum, and in fact, throughout the Victorian Aboriginal community. The series will present the rich tapestry of knowledge within our network and provide context for understanding the complex experience of bushfire in Victoria. Thank you again for joining us, and may 2021 be a brighter and safer place. Thank you. Bye, everyone.